Earlier this year, Southwest Airlines released plans to fly internationally out of Hobby Airport, adding up to 10,000 jobs to Houston's economy. But United Airlines opposes the plan and claims the expansion would actually cost Houston 3,700 jobs at Bush Intercontinental and would diminish Houston's ability to compete with other large cities. Tonight, representatives from both Southwest and United join us to discuss the pros and cons of the proposed Hobby expansion. I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight are Dr. Praveen Kumar, Chair of the Finance Department and Executive Director, Global Energy Management Institute, C.T. Bauer College of Business, University of Houston. Brian Znotins, Managing Director of International Planning, United Airlines. And Scott Wells, Leader In-Flight Base, Southwest Airlines. Before we start, remember you can share your thoughts throughout the show on Twitter using hashtag Houston8. And welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to start off by saying and explaining to our audience that this is not meant to be a debate, but meant to educate our audience about two different sides of a particular issue that is facing our community. So with that said, let's begin with Southwest. And Southwest's concept plan that they have brought forward about flying internationally out of Hobby is what?
Thank you, Ernie, for inviting us here today. What we are asking to do is basically amend our lease agreement that we have at Hobby Airport to add an additional 5 gates so that we may start service to Mexico, Latin America, South America, and the Caribbean. Along with that would be a Customs and Border Protection facility along with those gates.
Okay, and now I'm going to go over to United and say, sounds like a great idea. Adding more flights, good for the community, more people have an opportunity to fly wherever from different locations. What's the problem in that school of thought?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that more flights means good for the community, more opportunity to fly around the world or around the United States, but the data that supports the analysis that puts, in theory, 10,000 jobs into the economy is flawed. And so what we've been trying to do is highlight more reasonable expectations or reasonable data points that we can reference and show that as a result of adding an FIS at Hobby, the competitive advantage of Houston would be lost, and there would be a net loss in jobs. I'm sorry, Federal Inspection Service, okay. The ability to process international arrivals.
Okay, so Dr. Kumar, okay. This is not the first city where this has been an issue.
Right.
Other cities have it. What's at stake here? What are we talking about?
Actually, I mean, I think from where I sit as an economist and as a citizen of Houston, I think the issues are pretty clear-cut. First of all, the price competition benefits of Southwest, for example, expanding into any new market are very high, they're highly substantial. There is a long body of available research that shows that when low-cost carriers, for example, like Southwest, enter a route, typically over time that leads to a reduction in fares by the legacy carriers, that is the carriers who were earlier in that routes, by anywhere between 20 to 34%. And I have seen studies relating specifically to Hobby versus IAH, where in the past Southwest's entry into certain routes have actually lowered the fares at IAH by about 15 to 20%. So now that's a positive benefit where all our community benefits, and that's consistent with our social norms. Our entire antitrust legal doctrine is based on facilitating price competition. So you could say, well, that's a slam dunk case, but there is one exception, and Brian sort of alludes to that, which is that typically what's happening is you have what we call a scale economy problem, because building airports is a very expensive business. You have to create huge amount of capacity. It takes a large amount of investment up front. And every airline, like in case it was Continental earlier, who helps build that capacity for us in Houston, expects over time to be able to utilize it. So I think that's where the United's concern probably is coming from, which is that they have sort of a lot at stake in terms of keeping the utilization of capacity at IAH high and not losing it, so to speak.
Let me talk, Brian, a little bit about this particular point, and for people to understand that one concern is that if you open more, and I hate to use the word opportunity, but more areas where they are going international, that would diminish the audience size, the passenger size at your airport, and then in effect that would harm the community long term. Explain how that lays out.
Well, how it rolls out is basically we have a very sophisticated international facility at Intercontinental right now. It's built, and on the United side, it's very well utilized, but on the other airline side, if you're familiar with the airport Terminal D, there are 12 gates there and only 13 international flights a day. So there's plenty of room, and it's like building a second house when 3 of your bedrooms are unoccupied. There's really no need for it right now. And so we welcome Southwest at Intercontinental because there is already a facility built waiting for more airlines to come. And by splitting traffic to Hobby Airport, we lose the benefit of all the airlines working together to exchange traffic. So today, United Airlines shares over 2,400 passengers, or 200 passengers a day, which is over 14,000 passengers a year, on other airlines. And so a passenger coming in from Qatar, from Dubai, those are on both of those home countries' airlines, will connect to United and vice versa. And so when competition comes in, not only does it benefit from the hub that Houston has built at Intercontinental, but it also supports the hub that Houston has built at Intercontinental. And so by those passengers going back and forth, you have a grander economies of scale put together, and each airline benefits from one another. As soon as you bifurcate that ability to swap passengers back and forth and move service to Hobby, you lose that ability to support the hub while benefiting from it at the same time. And it's really diseconomies of scale at that point. You're taking all the infrastructure you've built, ignoring it, and building brand new infrastructure that won't support the existing infrastructure.
Okay, I'm coming to you, Scott.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm no economist like these gentlemen, but what Southwest has is 40 years of experience of seeing Southwest or a low-cost carrier go into a market. That lowers fares, which creates an opportunity for the other carriers that were already there to lower their fares to match. And that creates more traffic. More traffic creates jobs, which creates an economic impact. And a great example is when we entered the market into Greenville, South Carolina last year. Traffic is up 38% for all airlines. As far as Southwest going to Intercontinental, currently we don't do a code share with any other airlines. We're not looking to fly international to Dubai or London or whatever. What we're talking about is 5 gates from Hobby to Mexico, Latin America, South America, and the Caribbean. We have an extensive operation.
Let me stop you there just to understand the point.
Okay.
As a layman in all of this,
right.
I think to myself, well, why not then just go out of Intercontinental? If the
right.
gates are already there and the infrastructure is there, and United seems to be saying they're not going to fight you coming into Intercontinental, which
right.
I don't know if they'd be able to anyway.
Right.
But why isn't that an option, or is it an option?
Well, it's not really an option because for 40 years, Southwest has been in Houston. Houston was one of the cornerstones of the foundation of Southwest, the famous triangle that Herb created on a cocktail napkin. We have 135 flights, give or take a few, here at Houston Hobby. Our network, we're different from the legacy carriers to where we don't have a hub and spoke. We are point-to-point carrier. But one of the reasons that we've been profitable for 40 years is our customers like the fact that we take them to secondary airports that are closer to the destinations they're looking for, such as Hobby. It's very close to the Galleria, to the Medical Center, to downtown, and to Galveston. And so for us to completely just uproot an operation of 134 flights and move out to Intercontinental it's just not feasible. It doesn't make any sense, and especially doesn't make any sense for our customers. And if you'll forgive me for a second, one argument or point that keeps getting brought up in this conversation is I hear opponents talking about that they don't think Houston there's enough originating traffic here to support 5 additional gates out at Hobby. We feel completely different about that. We think that if you lower fares, it will generate more traffic. This is the 4th largest city in the country. This is a very active business region with the energy sector, the port. We feel like we would love to have the opportunity to give the citizens of Houston and the region, Houston area, the opportunity for tourism, business, college students to travel abroad. That we just would like to provide that opportunity.
And a lot of points that you bring up are in the studies that have been released. Right. But, Dr. Kumar, there are questions about the studies then, and that both sides have different points of view. One thing that I've noticed that's been explored is this talk about the lower price of tickets, and that I guess $130 some odd you talk about sending people to South America, that they can do it.
That was the airport's study.
That's the airport study. Yes. But that's questioned because the fuel prices and all of that could play into effect, so that these numbers, what can you hang your hat on in these kind of reports?
Actually, I mean, I think the to me, Anil, let me just back up. I think the issues are very clear cut here. You know, because there is a clear benefit of the price competition, and that I don't think anyone can contest. I mean, because that's been proved, and as you said, in Chicago we saw that in Miami. So no one can contest the very substantial benefits of price competition. And in fact, it's not just price competition, it's actually service innovation, because once you have competition, everyone has to compete for the customer's dollar. So we are all better off in that sense.
Don't lose your train of thought. I just want to check with Brian. Are you okay with that so far? Can you guys question
Well,
that?
I think competition is certainly a good thing. We just don't want competition to be split across the city.
Okay. Right. I just want to make sure I give you guys a chance.
Right. So I think we can sort of, in terms of getting precise point estimates like $130. Yeah. I mean, I really wouldn't even go in that direction. I would simply say that the historical analysis by very careful economists has been every time that we do see entry by low-cost carriers, it does over time bring back down the fares, not just overall in that market by about, I would say, at least 15-20%, and could be even more as well.
Okay, then take me into the issue about what does it do to dilute the service. As Brian has just said, you know, they're in favor of the competition, but not to split the market size, the audience. What do you say on that?
Right. My perspective on that would be that if over time, because let's say that, you know, let's just think this through. If Southwest comes in those particular Mexico, Latin American routes, they lower their fares relative, say, to what we see at IAH. The airlines flying, including United, they're not going to sit pat. They're going to compete for the market share, and they're going to bring down their prices as well. So it's not at all right now very obvious to me that, you know, you're going to have a major shift away from IAH toward hobby, because the fact of the matter is there are a lot of us, and this may hopefully hearten Brian, me and my family, we've actually traveled almost 95% times on United, even though we know we pay a price premium. So if the fares of United come down, we are not going to defect from United to hobby for anything, you know, if we are not doing so already. So it's not very clear to me right now how, in a sort of fair competition situation, we're going to lose passengers from IAH to hobby.
Brian?
Well, I think there's been a lot of talk here about studies that have been done that show that fares go down 15 to 20% as a result of Southwest entering markets. And those studies are really based on something called the Southwest effect, which was a report released in 1993. It's a pretty old report. Back when oil was at $30 a barrel equivalent, adjusted to today's dollars. And oil's in a different place today, and the airline industry is heavily dependent on the price of fuel, and that changes the economics of the airline business. And so what we've done in our study is we've taken a look at markets that Southwest wasn't in 5 years ago, but entered in the last 5 years, and compared the market size and the fares in those markets from before entry to today. And if you look at those market sizes, it's only 10% higher in terms of overall traffic, which certainly isn't enough to support two carriers and to make up the loss of one to another, but the fares are actually 4% higher in those markets versus where they were before Southwest entered the route. And so referring to the Southwest effect as something current today is really referring to like the CB radio effect as something that's current today. It's old. The industry has changed. The world has changed. It's changed a lot of different industries. And so to go back to studies that have been done 20 years ago, 10 years ago, are certainly not relevant today.
Well, and if you'll permit me, just a couple of days ago, the Department of Transportation issued a slot release. They awarded 4 additional slots out of Washington Reagan Airport. And in their release, where Southwest was awarded a slot from Reagan National to Austin, they comment on the fact that Southwest, with the low fare competition, when they enter into a market, it stimulates traffic, it stimulates growth of the region, and they even go on to comment about the Southwest effect. So it's not something that is the CB radio effect, and I don't mean to diminish that, but we feel like the Department of Transportation recognizes that, and we've got 40 years of experience showing that that's been the working model.
Dr. Kumar?
Yeah, actually, so going back to this issue about, but as I said, clearly we do recognize that with these scale economy issues, diseconomies, as Brian was talking about, that is a concern. But it would seem to me, Annie, that that those issues could be resolved very clearly by looking at data. We are not looking at some deep, mysterious scientific project here. We can very quickly estimate how much excess capacity. Just to sort of put that point in sharp, if you see the sort of the position taken by the Director of Aviation, who wrote a memo to our mayor, sort of, I guess, supporting Southwest's position, that memo and that study seems to indicate that that there is no excess capacity. That is, there are no quote-unquote free gates, effectively, because it says Southwest would have to sort of build a whole new terminal at IAH. But whereas if you take, like, Brian's position, he clearly seems to be arguing that there is excess capacity, there are free gates, that could be utilized. So it would seem to me that that's a situation that can be resolved relatively easily by just looking at some basic data, right? So it's not
being the person just observing this from a distance, and I think to myself, free economy. What's the problem? Let Southwest do it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. A lot of people, I think, are thinking that. Brian, what do you think is the flaw in that logic?
Well, I think the flaw is Southwest is looking for the city to let them do this and to pay for this, really. If you look at the proposals that have been discussed thus far, Southwest is looking to pay for this facility expansion with an increase to a passenger facility charge, a PFC. And it's a 50% increase in the tax that passengers pay when they fly out of Hobby Airport. And so it's not just the passengers using international flights that will have to pay this increase in tax. It's passengers flying American to Dallas will have to pay that tax. Passengers flying Delta to Atlanta will have to pay that tax. And so if this were an intercontinental where the facilities are available and free and there's no change in passenger taxes, there's no problem there. The city shouldn't have an issue. But what the city is being sold right now is saying, increase taxes, pay for this facility for Southwest, and it'll generate 10,000 jobs. And the problem is that 10,000 jobs has been based on this $133 fare to Bogota. If you imagine price elasticity of demand, it's like a seesaw. As prices go down, passengers go up. And as the passengers go up, that drives the need for more flights and more jobs. So if this $133 fare is wrong on the one end of the seesaw, then that 10,000 jobs is wrong on the other end of the seesaw, and it would have to come back into balance if we use more reasonable fares. So although it's the airport study that has been put forth to say this $133 fare, you've seen Southwest advertise 10,000 jobs in the Houston Chronicle. They are supporting this study, and they are saying this study is correct when it's actually based on flawed data. And so what we're trying to say is get that seesaw back into balance, and as a result of splitting the gateways, you actually see it come this way, and you lose 3,700 jobs.
But let me just ask, though. Okay, so maybe it's not $133, maybe it's $150 or $175, and that's changing our seesaw.
But it's not even that level of magnitude. We're talking $133 versus $350. It is a huge order of magnitude, because at $133, Southwest will lose $142 for every person they fly to Bogota. It is completely unreasonable.
Let's say the prices are much higher than anyone has predicted, and people then decide they still want to fly it. Isn't just simply the fact that they're flying it adding jobs, the construction jobs, the work jobs on this, isn't there automatically a gain of jobs? Maybe it's not 10,000. But in your studies, or the studies you look at, you actually talk about a net loss of jobs to 3,700. How do we get from, even if we adjust that scale from 10,000 down to 8,000 or 5,000, how does it drop below zero to losing jobs?
Well, first of all, the 10,000 has shrunk to 700, and then as Gary Kelly said at City Council testimony, it's now 50 to 100. As he said, in 2020 is what he thinks the job estimate will be at Southwest as a result of adding these flights. So it's already come down quite a bit. And so if the city is going to spend $100 million or ask passengers to spend $100 million, I would think it would need to be for more than 50 to 100 jobs. But to answer your question directly, the reason why we'll see lost jobs is because all the studies that have done by the city and Southwest to this point assume that United will increase flying as a result of this activity, when in fact the opposite is true. If you look at JFK and Miami, in overlapping markets where LCCs have gone in, or low-cost carriers have gone in and added service, on a one-for-one basis or even greater, the home carriers have reduced their capacity to offset the increases of the capacity by the other carriers. And so having seen this and knowing that we have a fiduciary responsibility to be profitable in Houston, we're going to take a bunch of flights out, 10% of our planned capacity versus where it will be in 2014, and move it to other hubs where it will be better, because we know that as a result of this addition, our flights will come down, and as a result, you'll see a net loss of flights in Houston, a net loss of passengers, and a net loss of jobs.
I mean, just got 1 second, but what pulls at me here then is, okay, well then if you're pulling some flights out of the market because this happens, then Southwest could pick up that. And so then there would still be that need, or a perceived need. And so if you guys are leaving that market, that gives Southwest more opportunity to fly.
But Southwest isn't going to add flights to Auckland or to Asia or to Europe, and those are the flights that are coming out. They're not going to add a flight that is today flying in a 50-seat regional jet, because the Southwest's smallest plane is 140
But then explain
seats.
that to me. If you're losing flight, you're moving to another hub because Southwest would be flying to South America. Why would that affect the flights then to Asia and to Europe if they're not going into that market? Isn't there still the same need of those people to get to those places?
It's complex, but if you'll bear with me for a moment, it's how you build an airline hub.
One second.
Okay. So right now, Houston has a competitive advantage because it has one international gateway, and as a result, it's attracted more capacity to intercontinental than an average hub in the U.S. And so as a result of weakening the hub, because we weakened a series of flights to Latin America, those flights will go away, which in turn make flights feeding those flights. So imagine someone going from Detroit to Houston to Cancun. If that Houston to Cancun flight gets weaker and that one of those flights has to go away because Southwest has added one, then we're missing a passenger in Detroit to Houston, and multiply that by 180 other destinations. And so capacity that supports those flights has to go away, which in turn doesn't allow us to add new flights that depended on the ones that were supporting the Mexico flight that would also support a Houston to Auckland flight. And so it becomes a house of cards that starts to fall back. And we're not talking, it won't fall apart entirely. United isn't going to pull out of Houston, but we resize the hub to better reflect its loss of its competitive advantage versus the other hubs in the U.S.
Scott,
Okay.
I give you the floor.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, as far as the financing, again, nothing has been negotiated. What we are talking about, Southwest is talking about putting the city at no risk, or the taxpayers. Currently, airports all across this country, they finance their airport improvements, their projects by passenger facility charges, the PFCs. Currently, at both Bush and Hobby, it's a $3 fee.
And from what I've seen, you're talking about $1.50
a $1.50 additional fee to the original plan or proposal was a $1.50 increase, and Southwest would guarantee that, which we were projecting that this project would cost about $100 million. So Southwest would project it so that the city would not be at any risk or of losing any money on this, or losing any credit rating or anything like that.
Are you the primary client down at Hobby?
Yes, we are.
Okay, just so I understand.
And to the second point, as far as the jobs from the study, the 10,000 number, whether you like that 10,000, I know it sounds too good to be true, and maybe it is. But when a low-cost carrier goes into the market and it stimulates competition, fares come down, the other carriers will lower their fares to match that, just like you said, because they want a piece of that market share. Now, at that point, what happens is more people have the opportunity to fly. And then you have three jobs. You have direct jobs, which is what Gary Kelly was talking about at the council meeting, the 50 to 100 jobs locally and the 700 jobs for Southwest employees. I personally think that's a very conservative number. Second, you have the indirect jobs, which are the rental car agencies, the restaurants, and the immediate employers and impacts around close to the airport. Well, those customers, when there's more customers, they're going to need hotel rooms. They're not going to need restaurants. And it is the induced jobs on top of that third layer, which is how it constantly multiplies from the direct to the indirect to the induced jobs, where you get to that number of 10,000 jobs. This will stimulate the economy. That's why we support the airport study as far as the $1.6 billion annual income to the city's economy, and an additional 1.5 million passengers a year. And that's not just for Southwest. When this happens, this increases passenger traffic at both airports. So that's where we see their study as flawed, is they're making, when they're talking about pulling flights and things out, that we felt like, well, if fares are lowered, that induces traffic. Somebody will want to pick those passengers up. Whether they make the choice to do that or not, I mean, that's their decision. But if they don't want to, another carrier will.
I know this is going to sound like a slanted question, but I'm sure it's on the minds of everybody in our audience. And it's, why does Southwest think United is trying to block this?
I don't know. I mean, I understand they're protecting their operation. They have a huge market share. I think it's, and quote me if I'm wrong, I think it's 55% global market share from Intercontinental. And I may be incorrect on this, but I believe it's 97% market share to Mexico, Latin America, South America, and the Caribbean. But they have a very large market share. Let me just correct that.
75%.
75%. And we just feel like we would like to have the opportunity to compete against that and give the citizens of Houston and the United States, basically everywhere Southwest flies, give them an opportunity to fly on us down there.
And Brian, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I think we welcome competition. Translating 50 to 100 jobs into 10,000 is a bit of a reach for me. I don't know if it is for our viewers as well. But overall, I think we welcome competition. We'd like to see more competition at Intercontinental. The facility's already built. Come on in. We welcome you. And we don't need to have taxpayers and passengers pay for a new facility at Hobby.
And unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you, gentlemen, for helping us understand this a little bit more. And each week we invite you to visit our home online at houstonpbs.org/Houston8. There you can read about the guests, learn more about the topic, and even watch past episodes. Now, next week on Houston8, in honor of Memorial Day, we turn our focus toward our returning vets and what are the best services, programs, and policies when welcoming our heroes home. That's next Friday night, 8 p.m. right here on Channel 8. And that does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Maureen Manous. Thank you for joining us.